let me do the formal intro, and then we will get into it. Hey everyone, Anthony Fantano here, internet's busiest music nerd. Hope you're doing well, and today we have an exciting and exclusive conversation that I've been dying to dive into for a minute. That would be one with a singer, songwriter, producer, multi-instrumentalist, Miss Chelsea Wolfe. She has a new record out titled She Reaches Out to She, which I gave a very glowing review much earlier this year. It's an album that I've been wanting to kind of peel back the layers on in a conversation for a minute now, just because it is such a curious and an interesting record for Chelsea. And yeah, I'm just excited to get into this album and learn more about it, and just everything else that you've been kind of, doing, all the other projects you have orbiting around this record, because you've really been active in the last several years with, obviously the X soundtrack, and not too long ago, like, what you're doing with Converge with Blood Moon. And it seems like you still have a lot kind of going on into the near future with the stuff that you're doing right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely been staying busy, putting out a lot of work, but yeah, it's been fun doing like the different incarnations of this record was a treat actually to get to do.
Yeah, that's the other thing. You had kind of like this unbound version, or like different remixes and kind of stripped back versions of these songs, which I think really kind of like showcases, I don't want to say both sides of your writing process and what you do, but it definitely brings a new dynamic. And I think like if you've proven anything over the past like decade plus of output, it's like really how dynamic of an artist you are. I mean, even just like kind of comparing this to your past couple of records, one of which was more like, metal geared, one of which was more kind of like folky and acoustic. And this one, kind of like going back in more of an electronic direction, if you could even define it as that. To sort of like, I guess, first off, dive into the writing and creative process for a record like this that is so aesthetically different from your past few. Like, where exactly do songs like these start like budding? Do they sort of start in a state that sounds a lot like, what you were kind of showing us on that recent EP where they're kind of stripped back, or are you kind of like starting more with like the textures and the electronics and the, raw sounds that we're kind of like hearing in the finished product?
Right. Actually, most of them started more like full band. I mean, I guess, I don't know, it's very varied, but after my last album, Birth of Violence, I wanted to do an album that was like where the bandmates and I would get into a room together and work on stuff. Obviously, because of COVID, that didn't get to happen so much. So we ended up just sending ideas back and forth like everyone else was doing. And then, collaging sort of everything together. And then once I actually got to get into a studio with Dave Sitek, who was like the official producer of the album, that's when they turned more electronic. So I think before that, they were much more like rock and roll. And for a while, I was kind of looking for like a more like rock leaning producer. And I had like a short list of people I wanted to work with. And when I met with Dave Sitek, I don't know, like he wanted to kind of like bring out like the weirdness in the songs and make them like less, I don't know, traditional or something. And being in his studio and seeing like his wall of modular synths and just kind of like, it felt like you're inside like this robot or something. It was kind of exciting to me. And I felt like ready after sitting with the songs for so long to let them transform into something new. So yeah, that's when they became more electronic. And then, stripping them back again for this Unbound EP was, sorry if I'm just getting ahead of myself here, but stripping them back now is like, again, I've been sitting with these songs since like 2020, and it's like almost the end of 2024. So this was kind of my way of reconnecting with the songs where I'm at now and feeling a little bit more, I don't know, like I want to bring things back to the roots and back to the center, and just felt really good to sing them that way.
Dave was somebody who I had at least a few questions about, because he's a very interesting pick for this record. I mean, anybody who doesn't know, I mean, through his work with Yeah Yeah Yeahs and TV on the radio, he's like a bit of an indie legend, and maybe not somebody who I think people would presume would be on like a Chelsea Wolfe producers I would like to work with sort of short list. Like, how does Dave end up on such a list in the first place?
Yeah, it was Ben Ben had submitted a couple names for the list, and so it was one of his names, and I knew who he was and was kind of into the idea of something less expected, I guess. And like I said, once I met with him, I was more like intrigued because I knew it was going to be a little bit more challenging and different than, I don't know, maybe going with like a more straightforward rock approach.
Was there kind of like in the process of working with Dave and kind of making this record, was there a need for him to sort of like, familiarize himself with like your canon and what you do, and sort of like find a way to complement it or support it? Or was it kind of like a very kind of a quick clicking and sort of like matching?
Yeah, I don't know that he like went back and listened to my discography or anything. I think he was more into making something totally new. And I think originally he really wanted to take it super minimal
Hmm.
and really like strip everything away and just have like one electronic element and my voice. And while that would have been really cool, I actually think it was a bit like, I don't know, we had started these songs with like a full band, and it felt like that would be the weird kind of wrong thing to do, to just like remove everyone from the record except me. So
Hmm.
we found a balance of kind of stripping things away and making some of it a little bit more minimal, and also still having some drum and guitar elements and things like that.
So in those versions, like what were the original tensions still on a lot of these tracks? Like find a way to progress them up to the point where they're like hitting these really intense like peaks and crescendos and drones and just like, really crushing walls of sound.
Yeah, I definitely wanted to keep it dynamic and have at least a couple moments on the record where it really um, drove things upward and like had that moment of culmination. So like the end of Whispers in the Echo Chamber and the end of Dusk, made sure to like keep those moments in there. Because that was like a point of tension with us, is like Dave wanted to take the drums completely out of the end of Whispers in the Echo Chamber.
Hmm.
And to me, that just felt wrong. And also like I was imagining playing these songs live, and I wanted there to be that drum element, obviously, that would translate really well live.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the thing is like kind of turning a lot of these, it seems like there's a lot of interesting sort of shape shifting going on, because you're going from a straight like series of rock demos and recordings and kind of like turning those into electronic hybrids, and then coming back and finding a way for the band to kind of recreate that in a way. Or is that kind of like a conscious effort that's going into your mind when you're doing these live performances of the songs? Or are you just figuring like the band will be enough to kind of give people a different experience of it and just kind of go from there?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if this completely answers your question, but like it was a bit of a challenge once the record was done to sort of relearn how to bring it to the live show, because a lot of the like vocal elements and guitar elements and things like that had been sort of transformed into an electronic element.
Hmm.
And so it was like taking a guitar part that became like almost a synth part and then making it back into a guitar part, or um, finding like vocal effects that I could play with that would sort of emulate the textures from the record and stuff. So it was definitely challenging. It took us, a couple months of at first to just sort of like find our bearings with it, and then just keep working on it. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, with what you do, there's like a really sort of like intense, I would say like emotive performance element to it. It was like kind of keeping that passion, keeping that emotion, keeping that potency in the vocals sort of like difficult, or was that at all hard to keep like, sight of or a focus on through the process of kind of like shifting these songs and shifting these instrumentals into something that was like mostly synthetic and sequenced, as opposed to, maybe like the more visceral feeling of a live band being behind you?
Mhm. Well, the vocals I feel like remained pretty like clean and upfront on the record.
Hmm.
Um, so I felt like, I don't know, that part was almost like easy in a way to sort of just try to keep that straightforwardness, and was actually a lot of fun for me because I'm usually, playing with a lot of like reverb and delay and stuff. So on this record, I was like, I don't know, I was kind of into just letting my voice be a little bit more present and just like raw. And I think because of that, like I learned to really like, I don't know, find more control with my voice and just be focusing on like the joy of singing and the joy of like that emotion or whatever is coming out. in a live setting, if that makes sense.
It seemed like a lot of your songwriting process, at least from like an outsider perspective, like shifted to kind of lean a little bit more on like the texture of what's going on, as opposed to like it's difficult to put into words, because in some ways I feel like thematically this is one of your more focused records, because there are a lot of those themes of like heartbreak and abandonment and like, you know, longing, like throughout a lot of the tracks that kind of like mirror each other and reference back. But then by that same token, it sort of seems like you're trying to put things as simple as possible lyrically, so that
Yeah.
like maybe the voice can kind of sit there as maybe more of an instrumental element, as opposed to, you know, trying to tell maybe a more detailed narrative where you're, you know, really kind of like leaning into the poeticism of what you're saying. I don't know what exactly I'm asking here, but, you know, at least in terms of like how you approach the lyrics on your records, from what you're doing here, to compare it back to, you know, Birth of Violence a little bit, it does seem a little night and day. It does seem like you're kind of simplifying things a little bit.
Hmm. I think I'm slowly trying to, like, my lyrics can tend to be a bit cryptic or like coded or something, and I'm slowly trying to become a little bit more straightforward with them. And so, yeah, there were definitely lines on this record that felt very like, you know, just, I don't know, straightforward. Like, I mean, I guess it's still poetic in a way, but to say something like bathing in the blood of who I used to be, like, that's, I don't know, pretty like visceral, straightforward image of just like a rebirth or something like that. So yeah, I was having fun trying to be a little bit more straightforward while still, you know, having my my way of writing things. It's a bit like cryptic.
Would you say you put more of a focus on this record in terms of like the overall linear narrative of it? Because, you know, in terms of like some of the themes of connection and possibly breaking up as well, it does seem like you put at least some conscious effort toward the end of the record to come to some kind of like conclusion or like resolution at the finish, like a revelation, I guess you could say.
Hmm. I have to say that kind of came later because the order of the album wasn't determined until like the very end.
Mm.
So I don't know, it's like, yeah, I think like thematically, I knew that these songs fit really well together. And once they were finished, it just became really obvious, like the order that they needed to go in, and the liminal being right at the center, being that sort of like void space, that in between space. And Dusk has kind of always felt like a closer to me, though, because it does have that feeling of like, I don't know, the end of the battle or something, kind of like whoever's involved in this story, just like, I don't know, finding some sort of settling point, whether that's like good or bloody or whatever. So, yeah.
Okay. You know, I wanted to ask you also about like some of the really interesting, I would say, like, you know, musical parallels on this record that I think like really stood out to me, you know, whether it be like Nine Inch Nails stuff or even like to a degree Portishead, like as you sort of like saw this opportunity to pursue like, you know, more of an electronic direction for the aesthetics of this record, were those like personal reference points that you feel like you were comfortable kind of pursuing, or maybe was that more of an inspiration Dave might have been working from, or was that just sort of like a coincidental middle ground that you guys kind of landed on as you were making this record, and it just kind of like ended up happening that way in terms of like, you know, some of the like the similarities there to classics that might kind of like be bringing in some of the same textures and elements and sounds and instrumentation?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been a big trip hop fan, and it's always been a big influence on me.
Mm.
And I was excited about like once we started working with Dave to sort of pursue that a little bit. It wasn't like a super intentional thing, like, okay, this song's gonna sound like Portishead or something like that. It was more just like loose inspiration. I would say like Massive Attack is probably the most obvious and present influence on this record. And
Mm.
Dave's actually friends with Robert Del Naja and was like sending some of these songs back and forth. So it was kind of cool to have him like, I don't know, on the peripheral, hearing a little bit of it. My song Salt on that record is definitely like a, I don't know, I describe it as like a call and response to that song Teardrop. And yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I'd say like Tricky, definitely like those really like upfront kind of raw vocals, like letting the sort of like grit of your voice be part of the record. That was influential for me for sure as well.
And you know, just like I don't know, the moodiness of it and the beats as well. It's all just like really entrancing, and there's like, you know, really a hypnotic quality to a lot of the tracks as well. That's like kind of undeniable.
Mm. Thanks. Yeah.
Was that something that like, again, was that another thing that like you guys were kind of consciously going for, or did it just sort of like, I don't know, end up happening that way? In terms of like, creating a certain vibe or kind of like, eliciting a certain kind of like response from the audience where you're kind of like putting them into a trance, you could say.
Mm. Yeah, I'm not sure it was like a super conscious thing. I feel like actually we ended up mixing it with Sean Everett, and I kind of feel like that's when the more like hypnotic elements came out. Like he really pulled out certain things, like at the end of Tunnel Lights, that sort of like I don't know, like almost like ducking the bass is doing and stuff.
Mm,
Which is something I've kind of always loved and wanted to incorporate into my music. Like that to me, like has like a very like trancy, hypnotic feel. And so that's kind of, I think when like some of those more, I don't know, those like hypnotic textures were pulled out a little bit more and the voice was like put in, I don't know, sort of a different place in the mix. And yeah, working with him was really cool. It was like he did a lot of it himself. And then Ben and I sat with him for 2 days and it was just like, yeah, it was feeling the songs transform even more under his magic was really, really cool.
I also wanted to ask you about this X soundtrack that you had worked on not too long
Yeah.
ago. Like, how exactly or when exactly did like that offer, that opportunity come through, and how did taking on a project like this for you kind of like differ creatively from the approach that you might typically take like for an album or anything along those lines?
Mm. I don't know exactly when I was asked, maybe 2020 or something like that.
Mm,
Yeah, I had done something with Tyler before for that like DC Dark Knights comic book soundtrack.
mm.
And yeah, just found it was like really fun and easy to work with him. And he reached out about the soundtrack and asked if I wanted to collaborate. And yeah, it was really fun. It was a big learning experience, I always say, because I'd never done anything like that before. And
Right.
like I've written songs specifically for like TV shows and things like that, but I hadn't been asked to sort of, I don't know, give voice to like specific characters and specific scenes. And so, yeah, it was, I mean, it's interesting for someone who doesn't like gore at all to have to watch like a stabbing scene, 100 times and write music to it. But that was challenging, but it was also really fun. And yeah, being given assignments is really fun for me because I'm always just like conjuring shit up from my own brain and inspiration. So I actually enjoyed the process. I felt like getting, specific, um, yeah, like things to do, like laughter or specific sounds or specific characters to sort of give like a mood to.
Hmm. No, that does kind of provide an interesting fact about the process because I was going to ask, was it like, I mean, for anybody who isn't in the know, I mean, it is a slasher film that has like a very interesting sort of like, porn plot angle, sort of like, inspiration to it. I was going to ask if sort of like the genre or the storyline or the concept behind this A24 production, like, was that at all a part of your process of deciding, yeah, this is something I'd like to be involved with, essentially?
I mean, I think it's funny because people always assume that I just love horror movies.
I think that's like the
And
presumption for anybody that makes any kind of content or art that's dark in any kind
mhm,
of way. Yeah, that's kind of the
exactly.
assumption. Yeah.
Yeah. And I do like I love dark films. Like I love Thirst and The Witch and things like that. And I love these movies actually. I mean, I'm not typically a slasher movie girly, but I think these are really well done and the storyline behind all three of them. I mean, I guess I should talk about X because I wasn't really a part of the other ones, but it was really interesting and really different and yeah, just really well done. So even though it has that slasher element that I'm not typically drawn to, I thought it was just a really cool movie and I enjoyed watching it.
Yeah, it's an unlikely context and narrative to sort of work that genre angle into.
Hmm.
Have you seen The Substance yet?
No, I don't think I'm going to because
Okay.
people have told me it has a lot of body horror, which I'm not good with. But yeah,
It
what
does
did
have a
you?
lot of body horror. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I liked it a lot myself, but I will say like there are elements of the movie where they're definitely sort of like incorporating this kind of cartoony, almost like Toxic Avenger trauma blood splatter sort of thing, and you don't usually
Mm.
see that incorporated into a film like this, especially one that's like so stylized and also has kind of like, obviously a very strong feminist angle to the messaging of it. It's not usually, it sort of reminded me of that in terms of like an interesting marriage of sort of influences and genres, but either way,
Totally.
as you continue forward, do you see yourself sort of jumping more into, film soundtracks or TV syncs? Like, was that a really gratifying experience for you? Or, is it really at this point, like more of a box you kind of checked off and you're going to focus on other things and trying to accomplish other kind of new challenges?
No, I would love to do more. I think the main thing is that I'm hoping that I can get to a point where I can sort of focus on one thing at a time, because there's just been a lot of like having 3 projects going at once, and my brain isn't really great with that. So I struggle a lot, like just going back and forth between things. So yeah, I mean, I would hope that at some point in my career, I could sort of take on a project like a film score and just focus on that for a period of time. So that's kind of like the ideal version. But obviously, if like the right project was presented to me, I would definitely take it because I loved that work and I would love to challenge myself to do more of it for sure.
Do you feel like you're in that position literally right now at this moment where you're focusing on 3 different things at once?
Maybe I did recently. I don't know. Like I just did. It sounds like I'm complaining. I shouldn't be complaining. Everything's great. But
No.
I just did a full band tour in Europe and got home from that. And I'm like immediately switching over to like a totally acoustic set that I start, I think, next week. And it's not the end of the world, but yeah, it's taking my brain a little bit to like sort of reconfigure, like, okay, I'm going to be up there mostly alone and I have to like translate these songs into a way that's interesting. And yeah, so I don't know. And I'm also like writing new stuff. So I guess there's not that much on my plate currently, but it just feels like it because my brain is doing that like sort of transfer thing right now, but it'll be fine soon.
Okay. No, it's just, and again, I don't agree with the sentiment that you're complaining. It's not coming off that way to me anyway. No, it's just an interesting sentiment to hear because, again, looking over your catalog and your progression up until this point, you, at least from the outside, you have kind of consistently come across as an artist who, seemingly kind of jumps from new challenge to new challenge really quickly, always kind of like doing something different and taking a different approach. You are, an interesting anomaly in a way, especially in, I think, like an age in the music industry where it sort of seems like in a lot of ways, like what's beneficial for a lot of artists is a lot of consistency, and giving their audience exactly what they know they're going to get again and again and again. And, I feel like you're somebody who consistently has proven to see success while subverting that. Do you yourself sort of like sense between you and your audience that kind of push and pull between kind of like giving them a bit of what they want, but also kind of like subverting their expectations a bit?
Yeah. I mean, I always think it would actually be probably easier if I had been more, I don't know, sticking to one thing, one genre or something. But it's just not who I am. And like, I have to follow my instincts to the next sound that I'm chasing. And I think that's probably, I don't know, maybe I wouldn't have been successful actually if I had just tried to do one thing instead of following what is actually like pulling at me. Anyways, now I'm getting lost. What am I doing? I don't know. I feel like there's there's like sometimes a feeling at shows where like I just did this set that was mostly like new record and like heavier stuff, and then there's a few acoustic songs. And I don't know, like I could tell the people who liked the acoustic songs and the people who liked the heavier songs, and it just was like, I guess it's okay, but it almost like feels weird when I'm like blasting like Carry On Flowers or something. It's just a super loud, heavy song. And I can tell that some people would rather just hear like Flatlands or something. So I don't know. I think it's a little confusing, and it's also just like I just have a lot of songs at this point.
Right.
So I'm always trying to figure out like which ones to play live. But again, I don't know. I think like there's a lot of times in my career that I've felt like people either around me or my audience would maybe want me to go in a certain direction next. But again, I felt like that would have been me forcing it. And I don't think that would have been the right thing in the end. So I don't know if I'm making any sense, but
no, I think you are. I think you're really kind of like explaining a very unique position that I think an artist only with your kind of catalog can have, to where, you probably have audience members who are coming at you from many different directions, depending on which record is like the first one they've heard or their favorite one. There's like a lot of variety there, but simultaneously, as you kind of like said earlier, if you had just stuck to one single sound for the entirety of your career, like, whatever you could kind of like narrow into maybe the sound of your first couple of records, like, would you have gone on to do this soundtrack? Would you have gone on to collaborate with Converge? I mean, those kinds of like crossovers to me just sort of seem like the only potential for them to happen is how you've kind of like traveled through your catalog in the way that you have, to where you are kind of touching down on a lot of different sounds that, some of which resonate very strongly with some people, some of which resonate very strongly with other people. And then, and then you're sort of like the common thread through all of that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I've had multiple incarnations of this project as well. And, we'll continue to do that over the years and bring in different players and different sounds. And I don't know, that's just kind of the way that I need to do things. And I have tried like sticking to one thing, and I like in former bands and stuff, and I always end up just feeling like I have to like bust out of that mold or that box, because I need to be able to do more and express like what is true to me at the time. And yeah.
Are there sort of like a, preferred or hopeful collaborators that you could also see yourself working with in the future that, that you aspire to do something with at some point, that you feel like could potentially work, on some kind of like imagined shortlist or something?
Mm. Right now I'm pretty much trying to find people to write with, because I typically just write alone or with Ben, and then we take things to like a producer and focus more on like the sonic elements. And I really want to find the right collaborators at this point that are going to help me like push my actual songwriting forward, and like from melodies to like arrangements and things, because I haven't really explored that very much. And it's interesting to me to think about actually like the craft of songwriting and just really focusing on that first and foremost, instead of focusing so much on like, is this trip hop? Is this rock? Is this whatever? Like just focusing on the song itself. And then that could probably take many different forms. I've already done a little bit. Like I've been working on some songs with this producer slash writer, Jen DeSilvio, who's more like pop leaning. And I don't know, we've been writing some stuff that I feel like is almost like, I don't know, like in the realm of like Annie Lennox or something like that. So I don't know. I made a TikTok recently talking about how I feel like my music is about to get a little experimental, because I'm just feeling that way. I'm like 41 years old now, and I'm just like, I've done a lot of stuff, and I kind of just want to like have fun and focus again on like writing good songs, no matter what they sound like. And I don't know. I definitely feel like at some point I'll be pulled really strongly towards making heavy music again. Like I can feel that somewhere deep within me. But right now I feel like I don't know, leaning a little bit more towards like, yeah, I don't know, like the unbound kind of feeling of just really stripping things down and going from there and trying to write even better songs. I'm just rambling now, but yeah, I think we kind of touched on earlier how I feel like a lot of my music is based more on like textures and being like cinematic and, sort of creating this like visual story. And I think I want to actually focus on like writing a really good song that tells a story in itself without having to have a lot of like, I don't know, electronic textures or whatever to sort of like bring that forward. Does that make sense?
No, it does. When you say sort of like improving as a songwriter, currently right now, as somebody who's been doing what you do for as long as you have and had seen success with it, I feel like it would be, difficult to argue that, you don't showcase, unique and standout talent as a songwriter. But, what do you feel like personally at this point, as somebody who's been doing it for as long as you have? Like, what are your blind spots? What do you feel like you could be doing better in the writing process that you're still kind of like looking to learn?
I feel like maybe just, I don't know, bringing things to like a little bit more like traditional place or something, like actually focusing on, I think sometimes I'll focus on like one part of the song, like, okay, this has a really good verse. And then, I don't know, over time I just I don't know, don't make sure the chorus is like as good or something like that.
Hmm.
So I kind of just really want to make sure that I'm supporting the song as a whole and that I really like each part of the song. And there's not like a part of the song where I'm just kind of like, you know, like this part's okay. But yeah, I feel like in the past I just have like maybe this isn't like I'm not like proud to admit this, but I think that because I'm a recovering people pleaser, I sometimes tend to get a little lost in the studio when I'm around a lot of different people and a lot of different opinions and things like that. Or um, I don't know, where I just like would let something fall by the wayside because I was so busy like trying to make sure everyone was like happy or something, you
Hmm.
know? Um, and I've done a lot of work with that even since like she reaches out. So I'm definitely more ready to like get into the studio and not focus so much about all that shit and just focus on the song itself and making sure that I really love every element of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's the natural balance of collaborating in the way that you do. You're in order to you still want people to be enthusiastic about what they're taking part in, even if it is your project at the end of the day, and everyone's going to have their own perspective on what direction things should kind of go in.
Yeah, of course.
So, like in the process of kind of like fine tuning your songwriting abilities, like, is accessibility a factor that matters to you at all in terms of like getting to that point? Like, are you thinking about like, yeah, I want to like write a song that like kind of pops off a little bit, or like, you kind of talk about tradition. Like when you talk about like, working things in a more sort of traditional structure or format, is like, focusing more on choruses and hooks and that sort of thing, like a part of that learning process for you?
I mean, honestly, it sounds like fun to me to try to create something that could maybe, I don't know, hook someone in a little bit more.
Hmm.
I don't know. I think it's funny because in the past, like my more uh, the songs that have like caught on a little bit more are the ones that I was like worried were way too cheesy or something. Like something like Carry On Flowers. When I wrote that one, I was like almost embarrassed of it because I felt like I don't know, it was just like too hooky or something like that. But now I'm kind of like, oh, I think it would actually be fun to write something that someone would want to sing along to. But I do feel like I've written songs in the past where like I like 16 Psyche when I wrote that, I didn't write it with like that goal in mind of it being like a catchy song or something. But once I wrote it, I kind of knew that it would be one that people would like, you know, um, that people would be into. And that is like one of the more popular songs. Like when I played it at a show, that's usually the one that gets like the most applause or whatever.
Hmm.
So that feels good to know that like my instincts are a little bit correct on that stuff.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, like the people I was working with at the time did not agree that that was going to be a song that people liked, but
Wow.
I knew that it was. So it's cool that like over time that's been, a proven thing that like people connect to that song as much as I do.
It's an interesting sentiment, and one that I've heard from a few artists that, maybe are sort of on the more kind of like experimental edge, that, after doing what they do for so long, after a while, there is kind of that longing or kind of like that temptation. Let me try to see what happens when I simplify things. And then in the process of that, like finding out that that kind of like brings in a bunch of challenges that you sort of didn't presume were there because of, I guess like, I think it's kind of assumed by a lot of people that it's easy to write popular music just because it's easier to listen to it.
Mm,
Whereas like creating it is kind of like a totally different beast than consuming it.
totally. Yeah. I think it's very challenging. And this isn't all to say that I'm trying to write pop music or something. It's just
Mm.
me saying that I'm getting a little experimental with my music and just trying new things.
Okay.
Um, and yeah, I think even I'm going to have a hard time with that because, like I said, when I write something that I feel like is a little bit catchy, I immediately am like, ugh, like, no, that's already happening. Like the songs that I said I was writing with Jen DeSilvio, like there's this thing I sang and I was just like, oh my God, that is way too cheesy. And she was like, no, that's actually like, that's really good. And I was like, okay, fine, I'll try it. But so I don't know, it's hard because I get like cringed out when something is like too perfect or too catchy or something. So it'll be an interesting process over the next year or so to try to write different songs. And maybe they'll end up just sounding exactly like everything else I've done. I don't know. Who
Mm.
knows? We'll see.
Okay.
You're like, whatever.
No. It's just really cool to get like insight on this, and like, Again, you are sort of like a very versatile and dynamic artist, and it's really exciting to hear that like you're continuing to kind of challenge yourself in whatever way that you are. I think if anything is encouraging to hear, it's that yeah, your current it's I haven't settled. I'm still like at the age that I am. I'm trying different things and like trying to explore different options, and I think that's great.
Yeah.
Um, I also sort of like what you've done here with this recent EP that you've dropped as well. Do you see yourself going into the future kind of like um, continuing to find ways to reintroduce audiences to your work and kind of like represent it in different fashions and sort of like show them like the different facets and layers behind whatever it is like they might kind of get out of your work in the original presentation?
Maybe. I mean, this was, something new to be able to have an album and then do like a remix version and then do acoustic versions. And
Right.
um, that was, things that I wanted to do. And that was also like what my record label wanted to do. So it worked out really well. And I don't know. I mean, I do like the idea of doing like a live record at some point and being able to re-release some of my older music in like that context. So maybe at some point we'll do that. But yeah, I guess I haven't thought that far ahead.
How exactly for Cellar Door did the Spirit Box cover like come along? And were you surprised at like what the band presented when you sort of like got that version of the track?
Well, basically I just like covered the chorus on my TikTok channel, and
Right.
then folks I was working with were like, "Oh, you should do a full version of it for this BBC session that you're doing." So I just put that together, and yeah, I mean, I really love this song. I think Spirit Box is a really cool band, and Courtney's an amazing singer and writer, and um, it was just something I was doing for fun, and then kind of just kept getting like encouraged to do more versions of it. So ended up putting that on there just to kind of like shake things up a little bit with the Unbound EP and have something that wasn't directly connected to the record. And yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but
No, I mean it's just really interesting that you dig on the band sound and that there's also sort of like some reciprocal kind of like respect there because I think that is sort of like a crossover that a lot of people wouldn't necessarily presume that
mhm.
you're into sort of like that style or that brand of metal, which I think as you were kind of like referring to earlier, there's sort of I think a snooty element of the metal or alternative rock world that might sort of like see that more genty, more poppy sort of shade of metal music is like, oh, that's cheesy or that's uncool or da 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 da. I don't think there would have ever been sort of like a presumption from a lot of people that there was like a connection or sort of like an appreciation there for what a band
Mhm.
like Spirit Box does, and vice versa.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I admire bands that can write songs that are so precise and
Mm.
just I don't know. Like I don't think I would ever be able to write a song or write music like that, just super precise. And I feel like everything I do is a little bit like messy. So um, it's interesting to me to listen to their music, and it just yeah, I don't know. It just feels like a totally different world to what I could ever do. And doing my acoustic cover was like I don't know. Like I said, it was just kind of for fun, and because I felt like the chorus lyrics kind of connected to what I was going through, and like that sort of like difficulty of rebirth and leaving something, and then like finding yourself just I don't know reeling from everything you've been through, and like realizing that you have a lot of like shit to dig out from in order to start over again.
Mm. Um, I just want to say thank you for taking the time and coming through and having this conversation with me and just kind of like, unraveling the process a bit, talking about where things are going, getting into the relearning the songwriting process, how precision's been inspiring you a bit more, and just everything else, that has been happening around this record. I appreciate you very much. Is there anything coming out around the corner that we should be on the lookout for, or are you mostly kind of like being low key now that you've had all these performances and this EP is out?
Yeah, I'm about to do a short US tour
Right.
that's going to be all stripped down.
Mm.
And then after that, I'm going to focus on writing and I am booking some stuff for next year, but like nothing's set in stone quite yet. But yeah, also thank you for having me on. And I really appreciate that you've been so supportive over the years. I know it's not like for me, it's because you do what you do, but I just think it's, a lot of people have probably found out about my music because of you and your awesome reviews. So thank you so much.
Yeah, and and I know you're not like writing your albums in the studio, being like, "Yeah, is Anthony Fantano going to like this?" But I still, thank you for writing them because, I mean,
Mm,
honestly, like, if there wasn't exciting or interesting music to talk about, my job in my life would literally be a living hell. So,
it's true.
thank. So thank you for making albums that are worth being excited about.
Oh, thank you. That's really nice
All
to
right,
hear.
no
Cool.
problem.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks for having me.